Matt Collins of Simulmedia. And Cliff, can you bring down the music, please? So while we're waiting to do that, I'll be just kick off, see if I can quickly kick off the show concept. So in the current environment, we are dealing with really historic changes that are happening in the media marketplace overall, with prices that are doing things that many people haven't seen in a generation. And that creates both opportunity, but also some things to work through for advertisers. You know, just as the recent declines in stock prices have created all kinds of opportunities for people to walk through and consider in terms of stocks being quote unquote on sale. So too, in many instances, is media these days. And that requires its own strategy and its own way of thinking and really understanding for each individual advertiser and agency how best to tackle that. Well, to help talk us through the best approach to a once in a generation media environment, I'm so happy today to be joined by Eric Fisher. Eric is the founder of HJA Strategic Marketing. He's also an adjunct professor. One of the coolest titles, by the way, that I think I could ever aspire to. Arizona State University, the Sun Devils, is where he practices his craft at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. Eric has over 30 years cumulatively of experience on both the agency side as well as on the client side. And he's worked at some real blue chip companies, including certainly ones you've heard of like the NBA, National Basketball Association, Walt Disney Company, Clear Channel. And he has seen these kinds of market dynamics unfold. For him, this is not necessarily a new thing. And so based on his experience, I thought it'd be great to have Eric come on board and talk a bit about how he's thinking about the current media environment and offer some advice for other people who might be thinking about the same sorts of challenges. So Eric Fisher, welcome to Simulmedia Live, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you again for allowing me the time.
So you want to tease me a little bit with what weather in Arizona is like today?
Oh, I don't think anybody on the phone really wants to know that. But I think high of about 88 degrees. So bright
Oh my
sunshine.
gosh.
So it's starting here in Arizona. You know, eventually, I think the first 100-degree day is next week. So we'll start that process.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's hard. Those of us in the Northeast who are coming out of what was a mild winter
Yeah.
are confronted with what has seemed like a kind of a cold spring. And so when you have a moment when you're done with that weather, if you wouldn't mind sending it east, that would be fantastic.
I told some people I'll do that, and I'll also send some MLS listings as well.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that happens about this time of year all over the place.
Absolutely.
All right, well let's get into the conversation. So
Yeah.
in the current environment, consumers certainly have shifted their priorities. Brands and agencies are in the process of doing some of the same things. I'd love to have you talk about how you see all of these changes impacting the way that you're thinking about the market, and therefore what buyers and planners should be thinking about as they approach the market today.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as you mentioned in the intro, I think I've got perhaps hopefully a unique perspective given I've been the client, I've been the agency, and I've also been on the sales side. So kind of seeing the landscape from all three perspectives. And as you mentioned, you know, certainly I always kind of go back when I'm looking at what's going on today to maybe the 2000, 2001 kind of upfront buying season on television, which again, I was on the sales side back then, and that was not a particularly friendly marketplace to be in on the sales side. But you know, from the different perspectives, I think there's a lot of conversations, obviously, at every level that's happening. I think at the client level, you know, the CFO model these days is probably, in terms of media pricing, is okay if we're staying on the air and looking out into the next couple quarters. If pricing goes down, we can get the same level of media reach and frequency for a lot lower. So let's spend a lot less. The CMO model might be a little different to say, okay, but if we spend the same amount of dollars, we'll get a whole lot more for our money. And then I think that might be kind of the solution probably comes up in more of a hybrid model where maybe you're spending a little bit less and trying to get a little bit more than you may have planned for initially. So I think that conversation, amongst many others, is going on again at the client level. And again, for those advertisers that still have a business model that is still conducive to doing business in the times that we're in. On the agency side, again, I think in the conversations that I've had, I think May 1st is a kind of a watershed date as on the television buying side for upfront advertisers. That May 1st date would be the date where you have to notify the media vendors, the television networks, about taking your third quarter options, which could be, up to 50% of the dollars that would be cancelable in a traditional broadcast upfront. So, traditionally, I believe the second quarter scatter market historically was kind of the best harbinger of the upcoming upfront season. I think this year, again, a little bit different. I think we'll get a lot of indications May 1st as to what that upfront season may look like. I've heard statistics that sellout levels traditionally 70 to 80% might be more south of 50%. So we're talking about multi-billions of dollars in our marketplace that may not be spent in the upfront. And then the decision needs to be made, again, from the client perspective and with their agency guidance as to how to approach kind of Q4 2020 through 2021 in terms of upfront, scatter, or however you might want to deploy those dollars. So, and again, from the sales side of the question, or the sales side of the desk, I think the question is going to be pretty much the same as what happened in 2000, 2001. Again, I'll refer to that year as I was on the sales side at that time. But, what we saw there was the broadcast networks and this top tier cable networks, had to make a decision. Do I dive on CPM and try to maintain the dollars or close to dollars as possible? Or do I not kind of bend on CPM, take less in the upfront, and see if the scatter market will be robust enough to get us through? Those days, the decision, for the most part, was made to kind of drop on CPM and try to maintain the dollar levels. So, networks were writing significant double-digit CPM decreases, even at the top tier level, to try to get back to a point of stability versus last year. And then at the set, unfortunately, I wasn't even able to make that decision when I was at more of a mid or lower tier cable network. And when it got around for us to work with advertisers, it was okay. I already wrote significant double-digit CPMs with the top tier guys, so I certainly can't write you at less than that. But oh, by the way, there's very little money left over from what those guys took. So it was significant CPM decreases at significant dollar decreases, which is really not a lot of fun on the sales side. So again, I think there's a lot of different conversations going on as we approach kind of what's to come and what we would call our traditional upfront season.
Yeah, sure. It's going to remain, I think, over the next several weeks with that May 1st deadline looming. It's going to be an awfully interesting time to sort of see how does both the sell side and how does the buy side react to the current environment. In thinking about all that may change in the weeks and months ahead, I've found that in some cases there's so many unknowns that are still to be decided about, especially as it relates to how loosely or not the economy will be running, or how close or not it will be running relative to what we knew just a couple of months ago. That it seems to be a lot of value, Eric, in coming up with a variety of different game plans. A game plan that anticipates perhaps a faster acceleration to resumption of something akin to more normal, one that takes a slower path, and maybe one that sort of tries to find something down the middle of that. I'm wondering, how are you suggesting for your clients that they start that planning exercise, not just for the weeks that are ahead, but in thinking about the summer and the fall? Are you suggesting a similar sort of scenario planning?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I think companies, and when you look at successful companies, scenario planning. If this is the first time that you figured out the need to scenario plan, that you've kind of missed the ball, right? Successful
What a way to
organizations,
start.
yeah, I mean, successful organizations should be scenario planning at all times, for the good and for the bad. The example that I like to give, when I was at the NBA, we didn't do it every week or every month, but periodically we would have meetings where we would just sit around and, again, scenario plan. And, no idea was crazy or off the table. And it was a matter of, okay, say this happened. What would we do about it? One of the ideas I like to kind of use it as example was, we would have a conversation of, what happens if Verizon paid LeBron James $100 million to change his last name to Verizon? So you would see, on all the highlights, the back of his jersey would say Verizon. And
Is that something you
crazy
guys
idea
really talked about?
that came up in a conversation.
Ah,
And it's like, okay, again, it will not happen, but if it did, what would we do to it? What is there in the collective bargaining agreement, or what is there in all our partnership language that would allow or disallow a company to be able to do that? So those, again, Commissioner Stern, may rest in peace, was a tremendous leader, and expected, demanded that ability from himself, and then obviously for the people who worked with him, to be able to think like that. But again, getting back, if this is the first time you're scenario planning, uh, this is a big one, and B, you probably should have been doing it all along. So with a couple of the companies that I work with, one of them is a CPG product, and their problems are, the problems that a lot of people would like to have at this point in time. Again, it's a CPG at retail brand that is very well loved by their customers, and they started seeing a spike in sales around March 12th. We're kind of using that as the benchmark date for that, but in a category where 5 or 6% growth was in the business plan, they started seeing week over week grocery store numbers at 25, 35, 55, 85% increases, which is, again, most people would be very happy to have this problem, but it still provides, an issue in the fact that the capacity at the plants where they make the product, and kind to, at this point in time every year, they would probably start to switch some of the lines of production to summer products. And the fact that they now have back orders for the existing product, we're in the process of determining whether even or not we roll out the summer SKUs of products, which again is more of a company issue. But when it's more of a marketing issue, it becomes when your entire summer marketing campaign is dependent and reliant on the brands that you thought were going to be actually at retail. And the prospect of those brands not being at retail, what do you do with your marketing dollars that have been committed? How much of them are flexible? How much of them can be moved around? So we've been doing a lot of work with that, and the vendors obviously have been very flexible. Not that they have much of a choice at this time, but they definitely are amenable to helping out me. So I'm assuming they're amenable to helping out a lot of people, as again everything is in flux, and just the lack of direction that everybody has is really kind of an added level of flavor to this that I think makes this even a little different from anything we've seen before.
Eric, let's work through a scenario that is, I think, plausible for a lot of brands right now. The scenario that I want to throw out there and get your guidance on the following. Number one, let's assume that the brand question is not struggling to meet existing demand, and in fact could grow. It could support a spike in demand of the kind that advertising would generate. Number two, they're in a position where they might be able to adjust the creative if need be, but that's not really a barrier to standing up a media investment, including television advertising, getting it to run. Um, if you were in the room for a brand like this, a brand that, we'll just say, belongs on television, fits on television, has television creative, could advertise to meet demand, maybe wants to change the message around to meet the moment a bit. How are you guiding them? And specifically, let's start around the notion of balancing brand and building brand equity versus driving more of a performance outcome? What are some of the things that you would suggest they think about as they make that decision?
Sure. It kind of goes back to that CFO model and the CMO model, perhaps those discussions going on. And those invariably are kind of short term versus long term discussions, right? The CFO is always kind of looking out to the next quarter, where the CMO is supposed to be looking out longer than that. For me, having done a lot of work in the attribution and media modeling space, I've held true to the notion that really, if I had to define marketing in one sentence, it's just simply marketing is building brand volume or building base volume over time. And what do I mean by base volume? Base volume is if you stopped all advertising today, how much of your sales would come through the front door? Again, it varies greatly by category and by brands within category and things like that. But really, the notion of base volume really should control a lot of your marketing activity. So, um, again, in a scenario where I don't have production issues and I have a brand that can be on TV, you learn early on in your marketing career that you take share in the bad times. You don't take share in the good
Mm.
times. So, as cold and calculating as that might sound, and again, given the times that we're in, where there's not a lot of big taste for cold and calculating. As marketers, you have to be, right? That's our job. It's unfortunate, but it's our job. And a lot of these big packaged goods companies have seen sales erode. A lot of that has been taken by smaller, nimbler companies who may be able to tweak products or develop a value proposition that the old guard company couldn't do. Maybe this is an opportunity, if you are part of that old guard, to kind of bring back the notion of economies of scale. Right, in an environment where the smaller companies are able to kind of nip at the heels of the big guys and kind of eat their lunch, more of kind of like small piranhas eating a big fish. Now maybe is a time for the big fish to be able to fight back. Is it time to reduce price to drive somebody who might be smaller, who doesn't have additional product lines, who's again dependent on that one product for their entire business model? Is it time to take them down a peg or two with a price cut or with something
Mm.
else you can do, given the largesse of what you may have? Again, do you start overwhelming with spend, where again you would need obviously the presence at either retail or some e-com methodology for somebody to get it? But again, in the overall, is this a time to maybe take back share, given the abilities that you may have that your competition may not?
Well, I think what I hear is the CMO side of you that's coming out a bit on this to say that while you respect
Kind of the smooth, fuzzy, we're here to